Good morning, Secondary 3 Social Studies students. This is Mr. Seow, and this morning I want to talk about the essay for Chapter 3, Trade-offs, the SS essay, the weighing essay. Before I proceed, what you should have with you is your textbook, and your textbook, you can flip to page 62, which is the chapter on how do we decide what is good for society. And the other thing you should have with you is the issue 1 notes on citizenship. So let's start with a recap of what chapter 3 is about. Recall, and you can write this on your worksheet at the top. Recall that issue 1 is about citizenship and governance. And in chapter 1, we learn about who is a citizen. What does it mean to be a citizen? And we said there were some factors that determine what it meant to be a citizen. For example, having documents such as NRIC or your birth certificate that prove that you were someone that belonged to the country, and that is called the legal status. And for example, having a sense of belonging to the country, identifying with the country, feeling that your practices, behaviors, customs, and beliefs align with that of the other people in that country, and that was a national identity. And so we said that in order for you to be successful at responding effectively to essay prompts, whether or not in a practice or an exam setting, you must know the factors for each chapter, understand the main question or idea animating that chapter, and be able to have some examples in your back pocket. So, for instance, when you talk about chapter 1, who is a citizen? Who is a citizen? What makes a citizen? You need to know the 4 factors shaping citizenship, the attributes of citizenship, and one of which is legal status. And the back pocket example we just drew out is the birth certificate and the NRIC and your passport. And then you need to think about how this would lead to you having this sense of belonging to the country. One way in which a passport or a birth certificate gives you the sense of belonging is because when you have the legal documentation that proves you are part of the country, that confers certain rights, privileges, and responsibilities, and by using those rights, for example, the right to vote in a country, or the right to movement in the country, the right to employment in the country, right, that allows you to benefit from the country's laws and environment, which therefore grants you gratitude and a sense of belonging to that country. Okay, so that's chapter 1. And in chapter 2, we talk about government, right? What is government? What does it do? So this is the functions and roles of government. And the functions of government, right? We talk about the legislative, the executive, the judiciary. And the role of government, we talked about maintaining order, ensuring well-being, promoting the country's national interests. Okay, so we have a citizen and we have the government in chapter 1 and 2. We have this fundamental understanding of what makes a citizen and what makes a government, and that together builds up to our issue of citizenship and governance. So, what is chapter 3? Chapter 3 is about the decision that governments take. It's about the decisions that governments take. So, in chapter 3, we learn about what decisions do the governments make and why are they difficult. So for decisions that governments make, and often they are difficult, this is chapter 3A on trade-offs. Trade-offs is the decision to sacrifice A to achieve B. And examples of trade-offs we learn are between differing needs, differing priorities, and unequal sharing, of course. And for chapter 3B, It's about how do government make these decisions, and that's the principle shaping governance, of which we have four. There is having good leadership, anticipating change and staying relevant, a stake for everyone, and practicing meritocracy. Okay, I know I went a little bit in detail here, but these outlines are important for you to understand the shape of what we are learning in social studies. And I'll give you one example. So for chapter 3, we are looking specifically at the relationship between government and citizens, right? In chapter 1, we learn about who is a citizen. In chapter 2, we learn about what is the government, what do they do. In chapter 3, we examine some of the more complex and difficult interactions between government and citizen. And why would government have to make difficult decisions, right? The government is there to take charge of a country and to ensure the well-being of the country. I repeat, the government is there to take charge of a country and to ensure the well-being of the country. And in 2B, we saw a little bit of this. We said the government should maintain law and order, which means that they have a good police force to prevent and deter crimes. They could catch criminals, whether it's the violent kind of criminals or cyber crime. And by preventing crime and by restituting a sense of justice to the people in the country, right? People feel safe, they feel secure, they feel like that there are consequences meted out to offenders, and that allows them to benefit from a good government. So for things like maintaining law and order, ensuring well-being, or promoting national interests, and this is about deterrence and diplomacy. For these kind of actions by the government in providing for the public, there is very little concern, right? Like very little conflict because everyone benefits from law and order. Everyone benefits from getting well-being. So well-being, economic well-being is like the public goods, like the roads and the train system. And by providing for these, people get convenience and access. The problem comes in when there are different goods, when there are different groups in society that want different things. Everyone wants law and order, everyone wants well-being, everyone wants security, but not everyone wants specific goods that may conflict with their needs and wants. And what do we mean, right? In the chapter on trade-offs, we talked about sacrificing A to achieve B, and in the factor on differing needs. And here I invite you to go to your notes, your content notes on differing needs. We looked at the Toei estate case, where the government removed the basketball court and built elder care facilities in Toei estate. And we said that the youth felt that they needed exercise and a place for recreation, and the elderly felt that they needed somewhere where there would be facilities and staff to take care of their needs, right? So there's a clash between the needs of the youth and the elderly. But because of limited resources, only one of these two things can be built, either a basketball court or elder care facilities. And therefore, this is an example of a good that faces a clash. It's good to different groups and good to different people. And the government must make a decision between these differing needs. And in the end, in the Toei estate case, they decided in favor of the elderly, which means that who is disgruntled? It's the youth. The youth are angry and disgruntled. They are frustrated. They feel that they have been shortchanged. And then there may be dissatisfaction in the government's decision, and there's less public trust and support. And so this becomes a challenge for the government, and there can be tensions and conflict. You can just imagine at the back of your head now, right? The youth whose basketball court is taken away, they might be angry with the elderly because they feel like this elderly have taken away their place to play basketball. And that would create social tensions, which would lead to a less harmonious society, frictions, and delays. Okay, so this is one example of a difficult decision that governments make under the broad umbrella or factor of differing needs. And we said that in the trade-off chapter, there are differing needs, differing priorities, and unequal sharing of costs, and I invite you to recap this chapter and read through your notes and understand concretely what each of these different trade-offs are about. And so given that the government is faced with these difficult decisions where we have to sacrifice A to achieve B, how do you decide who to sacrifice? How do you decide? And there are four principles, ideas, or sort of moral beliefs by which the government proceeds and achieves its goals. Because ultimately, when we decide, we are not deciding for one side or the other based on biased feelings. We are deciding based on what achieves the betterment of society or the good of society. And broadly speaking, the government's decisions align to these four cardinal principles of having good leadership, anticipating change and staying relevant, a state for everyone, opportunities for all, and practicing meritocracy. And I invite you again to go and read your notes, highlight them, read them on the bus or train or car ride to school every morning so that it is built into your brain. And I'm going to give you one example of a principle, anticipating change and staying relevant. And this principle is about knowing or guessing or forecasting what is the next challenge for Singapore and being prepared. And one challenge that the government identified for Singapore as an island country is the challenge of rising sea levels because of global warming and the melting of polar ice caps, right? Broadly speaking, the volume of water in the Earth's oceans are going to rise, and that means that this might cause a threat to our coast, East Coast, West Coast, so on, right? With the rising tides, this could be dangerous. It could overflood certain areas. So the government has started putting aside money in order to protect our coast and ensure that we have um, sufficient resources to meet the challenge of a rising sea level. And what is the trade-off here, right? If you think very carefully, think a bit deeper, you will realize that by putting $5 billion away to protect us for future threats like rising sea levels, right? This money is not available now to help with, for example, cost of living. If you think carefully about it, $5 billion go into seawalls and dikes and resilience strategies to ensure that our coasts are well equipped to deal with the rising sea level in the future, means that we can't spend the money in the present right now. Means that there's 5 billion less to help people have GST vouchers or CDC vouchers or money to spend on their daily needs, right? So that is a trade-off. We are trading off the present, certain needs, for the future, certain needs. And so this is a principle by which the government decided, yes, the present is important, but we must manage the threat and challenge of the future, and we must put aside some money now, right? We can't just be fixated on the present. So this is an example of how the government decides in order to manage difficult decisions that we call trade-offs. All right. So we are now in chapter 3, right? And as the next chapter 4, which is about citizens again. So the perspective will shift in chapter 4 back to citizens, and it'll be about how citizens and government will interact to work together for the good of society. But this chapter is really about the difficult decisions, about trade-offs. And there are 4 questions, and I'm gonna skip. Can I invite you to skip? Skip over to page 3. To page 3. And this question is a bit of a tricky question, and I want to spend time talking about this question, and showing you how to do this question. And then I'll leave the rest of the questions in this worksheet to you. Okay. So as we know, when we approach the weighing essay, the essay question will provide two factors and one focus, or one factor and two foci, and you have to sort of map it, right? So here the focus is about what's more challenging for the government. And the factor given, and the factors in a social studies question must map to the syllabus. They are things that you will have seen in the syllabus. There will be no surprises in that sense. The factors are, first, manage the competing needs and interests of citizens. And can you find factor 2? It's here, right? Strengthen citizen sense of belonging. So how do I craft my response? I will go into answering the question factor to focus. And in this case, I'll follow the question: is it more challenging for the government to manage the competing needs or to strengthen the citizen sense of belonging? Clearly, the first argument must be about managing competing needs. And so I start with: it is challenging for the government to manage competing needs and interests of citizens. And I need to first elaborate by describing the factor. I need to describe the factor. So what is the factor? It's about when different groups in society want different things. And we just talked about Toei estate. So one example you could use is about the Toei estate case between the youth who want a basketball court and the elderly who want elder care facilities. And I think that's a quite a good example to use. And I leave it as a challenge to to the students, to my students who are watching this video and doing this as homework. I leave it as a challenge to you if you would like to try using your own example and explanations. I leave it as a challenge. In this case, I chose to look at the cross island line. And why can I do this? Because the factor mentions differing needs, but also differing interests. And in this case, interest here can refer to priorities. It is what we learned about in terms of differing priorities. So I wanted to pick the cross island line because I thought that's quite a salient example that we have done in one of the source-based papers for holiday homework. So it might be fresh in your mind. So I'm going to pick it up. In the cross island line, recall that we wanted to ask how to build this train line. And some people say build through a nature reserve because that's the most convenient. That will save the government $2 billion. That will save the commuters about 6 minutes of travel time. Right? It's going to be faster if we go straight through the nature reserve. And maybe I'll just pull up a picture so we remember what we were talking about. Right? So there were different routes, and some said go through the nature reserve, and some said go around the nature reserve, right? And this one will be more expensive because you have to build a longer pathway. It would also take more time, and more money to build, right? Because you need to build more. And finally, take more time for the commuters who are traveling, right? You go all the way, 6 minutes more. And finally, you displace a lot of residents, right? By building through these houses, they can't live there anymore. And so these are the sacrifices if you chose the route around the forest. But if you chose the route through the forest, right, the sacrifice would be to nature, right? The monkeys and the birds and the greenery, right? That would be affected by the drilling, the boring of tunnels, and so on. Okay, so there is a trade-off here, right? There are different priorities. No one's needs are impacted because on one hand, the path through the tunnel, right? People are not living there, so they are not really impacted. On the other hand, the path around the forest, around the nature reserve, um, yes, there's some inconvenience to people who have to move out, and yes, people need to travel longer, but in the end, they still get to travel, so the needs are all met, right? It's about your priority. So commuters want convenience, that's one priority, and environmentalists want to protect nature, and that's another priority. And because the government has to make a decision, in the end, someone will be left unhappy. So commuters want convenience, environmentalists want nature, and the government has to decide. Either you go through or you go around. There's no two ways about it, and so some will be left unhappy. And can I invite you to highlight the information as you read it? So let's continue. So due to the conflicting priorities, so we want to explain the ideal challenge. Right now, I've talked about this factor. I've given you an example. That's how I craft the essay. I describe the factor. I've given you an example. And now I need to connect it to the focus, which is challenge. So what in this becomes a challenge for the government? Um, well, due to the conflicting priorities, the government need to consult widely and try to meet everyone's priorities, try to satisfy people, and so there are delays. And so the government is less efficient in carrying out its plan. That's one challenge, that's one angle. Another angle is that because in the end the decision was to damage the environment, to sacrifice the environment to protect the interests of commuters and the residents who are living in the houses around, which we saw, right? Protect these people by building through. The environmentalists will be outraged. They'll feel, hey, you don't care about the nature. And they'll be angry towards those who prioritize convenience. And that could lead to social tensions, right? People are angry with each other, and the government needs to manage this sort of tensions and anger and conflicts, because there will be disruptions and disharmony. Okay. So these are reasons and explanations as to why the competing needs and interests, and managing these competing needs and interests, the trade-offs that the governments make would create a challenge back for the government. Okay. And so I'm going to pause here. I've given you the other factor. I want you now to take some time, pause the video, and try to go through the factor and write your own explanations. And I hope you did that, because this is your chance to practice. All right. So how do I craft the next factor? To start with the point, it is the same. I want factor and focus. So it is challenging for our government to strengthen citizens' sense of belonging. This is the one that feels a bit weird, because this factor, in fact, was not. So when we look at the trade-off chapter, right, and this looked like a trade-off essay, this factor was in fact not here. It wasn't differing needs, it wasn't differing priorities. And because these needs and priorities were in the first factor, one would think the last factor tested was unequal sharing of cost. But it's not. It strengthens citizen sense of belonging. And so what happened here, and this is an O level 2020 essay question, right? An actual O level question. What happened here was the national examiners didn't just limit the question to one chapter on trade-offs. They were in fact testing all the way back to chapter 1, where you had to understand the idea of a sense of belonging. And it's not even explicit as a factor in chapter 1. In other words, it's quite flexible. This was a very challenging question that year. It's quite flexible. The national examiners could ask a question that cuts across different chapters, right? And the idea of strengthening sense of belonging comes from chapter 1 and also comes about in chapter 4. In chapter 4. And in chapter 4, in fact, the angle of chapter 4's idea of sense of belonging is about how citizens build sense of belonging with the government. It's not about how it's challenging. I repeat, in chapter 4, yes, there's a factor about strengthening sense of belonging, but the angle in the textbook is about how we build sense of belonging together, citizens and government. It's not about why it poses a challenge. In other words, you had to understand the concept. You really have to understand this concept and elaborate with your own understanding. The examples you can still be drawn from the textbook, but you must now repurpose, retrofit, and re-angle your examples to fit the question's demands. So the question's demand here is about challenge. So what is it? So what is strengthening sense of belonging, and why is that a challenge? You can write it at the side. The question is, what is strengthening sense of belonging? And why is it a challenge to the government? And the students who succeeded that year in this national exam essay question are those who really unpacked the question, understood the question, responded to the question. If you have a pre-programmed essay that you blurted out, you just spam everything you know about National Day, and you say, hey, everyone's so happy, you got it totally wrong. So let's look at how we would elaborate. A sense of belonging means to feel included in the country. And what does government do? The government can get all of you to sing the national anthem and take the pledge. I intentionally use this example here in this essay to prove to you that your common knowledge, your knowledge of what happens in school, can be deployed to help you with the chapter. What else? That everyone learns English, right? Besides mother tongue, we all learn English, and that the government organizes National Day Parade. All these examples are already things you know, about sense of belonging. And the challenge for students to hit L3 is to explain why all of this is tough for the government. Why is this tough for the government? So this is a second chance for you to pause the video and try explaining. Or at least to think about bullet points to write at the side. So one area of toughness is here, right? Think about it. We ask you to sing the anthem and take the pledge every morning, but do you do it? So one challenge is not all citizens, not all students are compliant and keen on participating in taking the pledge or singing the anthem. They may view such practices as a chore and as an onerous chore. Thus, these students exclude themselves, which weakens their sense of belonging and damages the sense of social togetherness and unity. So it's ineffective. One challenge is that the government's efforts are ineffective because the students are not keen. And this is something you already know from your personal experience. And another challenge could be from here, which is about learning English and having a common language. Furthermore, students who are weak in learning English as a common language may rely on their mother tongues for daily communication. This creates social divisions and lack of communications between different ethnic groups, which impairs and reduces sense of belonging. So this is about using your brain and using your common experience to explain to the question's demand. The question's demand was, why is it a challenge for the government to strengthen citizen sense of belonging? And you thought about sense of belonging, it means about feeling included. You thought about what the government does to make you feel included, which is making you sing the anthem, take the pledge, learn English, National Day Parade. You put these examples out, and then you have to pivot back and angle back and think about why all of these would be a challenge to the government, right? In other words, when you look at a national exam question like this, or any question that challenges you to think beyond, right, that goes beside or the normal factor questions that you have been taught in school, don't panic. Use the knowledge you already have and angle your responses to the focus. Respond intelligently and you will succeed. And so what you have to do as homework is to do 7C, this question, and write down one of the two weighings. Perhaps I shall just talk about the weighing. So weighing, there are two ways to do. One is stronger factor, one is balanced conclusion. At this point, I'll be teaching you stronger factor. So let me continue to talk about stronger factor. You can read the other one on your own if you want to. For stronger factor, we state the final stand. We choose a deeper criterion to weigh both factors, and then we strengthen our chosen factor and weaken the other factor. So in this case, when I look at these two challenges, I think managing needs and interests is more convenient to explain as a challenge. So let's talk about why. Because we can never please everyone. It's not possible. When we have limited resources, as in Toei Estate or as in the Cross Island Line, there will be one group that's left disgruntled. And by definition, therefore, we can never succeed 100%, right? Because there are limited resources. Not everyone can be pleased. That's why the trade-offs are difficult. Because there will be one group that's sacrificed, and the government must make a decision based on their principles on who to sacrifice, why, and how does that achieve the good of society. And so there will be a dissatisfied minority. There will be some group that will never be happy with the decision. On the other hand, when it comes to strengthening national sense of belonging, it's true that not everyone participates, but no one is intentionally excluded. In fact, there's always a chance for them to come back, right? No one is intentionally excluded. There's always a chance for them to return and join at any stage of their life. So it's very open. And so we can, since it's possible to strengthen everyone's sense of belonging, but not to meet everyone's needs and interests, the competing needs and interests is a greater challenge for the government. And this is one way you could craft the weighing paragraph. Okay. And then we should annotate. So this is stand. This is the criterion. This is the strengthen one side. And this is the weaken the other side. Strengthen one factor, weaken other factor. All right. So in this video, I've talked a lot about this essay. I chose to focus on question 7C on page 3 because this is a national exam question and it's a sneaky one. It's a tricky one. So I wanted to impart some ways and angles of thinking in order to respond to such questions. Homework, you will have to complete 7C and 7A, both of these on the essay worksheet. And for 7A and 7C, you have to copy down these two essays again on foolscap together with the weighing essay. Then after you have done 7A and 7C, please proceed to do either 7B or 7D or based on whatever homework I assigned in class. So again, 7A and C must be done on the worksheet and copied on foolscap. And on foolscap, I want both pew paragraphs as well as one weighing paragraph. And this is my essay lesson for chapter 3. It's a tricky chapter. It's about the difficult decisions, the trade-offs that governments make that will sacrifice one side over the other. And it's about how the government approaches these decisions based on their principles. And that's what you'll explore in the 7B essays, in the 3B essays, in the essay question 7A and 7B, the principles that the government uses in Singapore to manage trade-offs. All right, that's all. I hope you've learned something. All the best in your revision towards the exam. Thank you.